Hiya!
Hey y'all!
Hi everybody!
Today I'm going to be doing a video called the accent tag.
Let's do the accent tag! Yeah.
If you don't know what the accent tag is, basically some guy or girl made up a whole list of words that apparently sound different depending on your accent.
The words are
Aunt,
route,
roots,
Wash.
wash,
oil,
theater,
Theater.
Iron.
Caramel.
caramel, ruin,
New
Orleans,
New Orleans,
pecan,
Alabama.
lawyer,
Coupon. Mayonnaise.
syrup,
pajamas,
water,
Spit in die Magen. Ladung.
So as you just heard, there are many different accents, and these accents affect the way we perceive the speaker. Now, before we begin speaking and looking into these different types of accents and how they affect our perception, we want to clear up a common misconception about what actually is an accent and the differences between an accent and a dialect.
A dialect is a specific type of English that differs from other varieties in its vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. An accent, on the other hand, is simply differences in the tonal sound.
So now moving forward with this video, we'll be looking at three specific cases: the perception of an accent within a culture, foreign accents in a host culture, and bicultural studies.
To begin, we'll be looking at the perception of accents within a single culture. We've examined three separate studies conducted by the British Library Board, National Public Radio, and a private university. Using the results from these studies, we will be examining the effect of accents on one's perception of intelligence, physical attractiveness, trustworthiness, and gentility.
The British Library conducted dozens of audio recording sessions in which their subjects were placed in multiple situations of varying formality. Then they categorized the common accent markers. In more formal scenarios, participants would often correct or even hypercorrect their regional speech patterns to, for example, reinstate dropped vowels or avoid multiple negations. In English, these both accent markers signify informality or even commonality. This goes back to the 19th century, when grammarians rewrote the rules of English to coincide with those of math and logic. The lower socioeconomic groups were less educated and could not keep up with the rules, generating the stigma on patterns that are still quite acceptable in other languages.
In the second study, University Professor Osagi Obasogi wanted to look at how race could be perceived through accents. And so what he did was he gathered a bunch of blind people who obviously could not see race, but found that through interviewing about 110 of them, found that they still perceived race in a very similar way to a sighted person. They could tell what race a person was based on their voice, with pretty high accuracy, and had similar perceptions and preconceived notions as to a sighted person, which concludes that race, while obviously very physical, also dominates the accent portion of their character as well.
In the third study, conducted at Brigham Young University, 123 students were presented with audio files of a standard American, an English, a Latin American, and Middle Eastern accents under the guise of a marketing techniques survey to measure prestige theory. This theory postulates that an individual who speaks with the accent of a dominant societal group will be rated better in status and solidarity dimensions than people possessing a regional or foreign accent. These two dimensions refer to intelligence, education, social status, and success rates, and friendliness, trustworthiness, and kindness, respectively. It was determined that persons possessing Middle Eastern accents were rated statistically significantly higher than those with the standard American accent. Persons with British accents were also rated higher than Americans in all cases, and Latin American accents were determined to not be lowest in any category. Important to note was that those who had lived outside the United States generally gave foreign accents lower scores than those who had not.
The second group of studies we're looking at involves foreign accents and how they're perceived by the host culture. So this would involve a situation like an immigrant to the United States, such as a Mexican or an Asian. And in these studies, we're going to be looking at how the perceptions of Americans changed based both on the strength of the accent and the origin of the accent. And this will be interesting as we look into how this affects maybe their employability or their ability to have success among Americans who all share a similar accent.
The first study we'll be looking at was conducted by Colleen E. Young of Albany State University. This study investigated the emotional responses of native English-speaking students who were about 23 in number to the voice recordings of 3 graduate teaching assistants at Albany State University. All of these assistants were women who had various levels of proficiency in both the Spanish and English languages. The first woman was a native English speaker who had high proficiency in Spanish. The second was a native Spanish speaker who had good command of the English language, and the third was also a native Spanish speaker who had lesser command of the English language. Each of these women were told to record the same passages in both English and Spanish. Subsequently, these recordings were played to the student participants, who were assigned to rate each of the teaching assistants in various categories solely based on what they had heard. These categories ranged from how interesting to how hard-working the speaker was, and were generally based on aspects of the speaker's character. Interestingly enough, the students rated the native English-speaking teaching assistant the highest in every category save for 2, regardless of whether she was speaking in English or Spanish. Thus, it was found that, overall, the students were somewhat ethnocentric in their judgments, often favoring the accents with which they could most identify.
The second study we're looking at about foreign accents comes from Longwood University. And what they did was they wanted to look into how accents affect a perceived credibility. So what they did was they had people from the university with varying levels of accents, different types of accents, all foreign, read a biology lecture. And then what they did was they had students listen to it and then rate it based on the perceived credibility of the speaker. And what they found was that almost every time the students responded that the native speaker had significantly higher credibility than the foreign speaker. And what this tells us is that, much like the previous study, is that there is a bias, if you will, against foreign accents in more than just knowing that the person comes from a different country. It actually permeates much further than that into the human psyche.
Now, the last set of studies we'll be looking into are bicultural studies. These studies investigate how various accents in the English language, both foreign and native, are perceived by people of all sorts of ethnic backgrounds. These studies are particularly interesting because they explore the international connotation of differing accents, as well as how individuals react to them.
The third experiment, conducted by Diego Barona at the CUNY Graduate Center, compares the attitude of native English speakers and non-native speakers to accented speech. According to the 2000 U.S. Consensus, people of Spanish, Arabic, and Korean language backgrounds make up some of the largest minority groups in New Jersey. Therefore, for this experiment, 3 males representing the 3 language backgrounds and 3 native speakers of similar backgrounds all read a neutral paragraph, which was then played back for 30 female participants in the study. 15 of these were native English speakers and 15 were non-native speakers of Korean, Chinese, Portuguese, and Spanish descent. All participants had lived in the U.S. for over 3 years and had learned English in an academic setting. All of these again had a similar background. In general, it was found that native speakers rated the native speaker readers better than non-native speaker readers. Non-native speakers, however, though they rated the native speaker readers better than the non-native speaker readers, they did rate the non-native speaker readers better than the native speakers rated them. There was only one case in which this was
varied, if you will. The study broke down ratings into 3 major categories, including competence with descriptions such as ambitions, intelligence, and confidence, integrity based on qualities like honesty, good character, and generosity, and social attractiveness, which was based on sense of humor, friendliness, and likability. Now, in the category of integrity, the non-native speaker listeners rated the native speaker readers higher than did the native speaker listeners, and that was sort of the only outlier. And what this tells us is that native speakers and non-native speakers on the whole have more negative attitudes towards non-native accents. However, it was hypothesis based on the results that previous positive interaction with non-native speakers can positively influence the scores that they received or how their accents are perceived. And also a final interesting social thing to note, if you will, is that the Arabic accents were rated much lower than the Spanish and Korean. And although the participants didn't know which was which, this may have interesting implications regarding just societal climates, especially in terms of politics following the September 11th attacks.
The final study we'll be looking into is one entitled The Cultural Influence Model, when accented natural language spoken by virtual characters matter. As per its title, the study utilized virtual characters to examine how bicultural Americans reacted to differing accents. 2 types of bicultural Americans were chosen as participants for this investigation. They were Iranian Americans and Chinese Americans. The participants of this study were asked to watch 2 clips of virtual characters who spoke in various accents. After listening to each character, they were to take a quiz. One of the characters spoke in a standard American or Californian accent, as this accent was the American accent that the participants were used to. The study showed that after being exposed to a standard American accent, the participant responded to the quiz more in line with American values and thinking. However, when the participant was exposed to the accent of his native culture, they responded to the quiz more in line with their culture's traditions and mindset. This study demonstrates how accents can affect everyday actions and decision-making processes, which establishes the significance of accents in interactions.
At this point, you've heard us talk about a lot of studies, and they all seem to agree on one point, that accents strongly influence the way we perceive other people, their value, their attractiveness, their credibility. All this, in turn, will affect our interaction with other people, the ramifications of which we will be discussing in class.